Do a mic check.
All right, let's hit it. Repeat this line back and check your clarity and tone. Mic check. This is Keith, coming to you live and unscripted. If you can hear this, the robots are listening too. How's that coming through on your end?
I think that's coming through pretty nice.
Perfect. You've got that clean, natural tone, clear enough for live and crisp enough for the podcast cut. Want to roll right into your intro and do a dry run of the first few lines?
Well, let's do something a little more casual. Let's have a little conversation first about the podcast. Sometimes it takes a little while. It's just the nature of it. I've got a really slow rural connection here in Atwood, Ontario, Canada. So we're essentially setting up to do up a podcast on automation, AI, and we're going to have a little discussion about its impact on the jobs and roles in Canada. Basically, we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution that's probably pending or midway through or just at the beginning. We're not even sure, to be honest with you. So it's going to be one of those interesting little investigations just to kind of get an idea of what's going on. So right now, I'm second year, actually 2.5 years, working with robots. And essentially, I've been entry level. So I've been servicing, maintaining, and doing general cleanup. That's essentially it. I'm not into the engineering or design of it. I'm more of the daily maintenance kind of guy. So it kind of gives you an idea where I'm sitting from that standpoint. And I thought I'd use my ChatGPT as a podcast director and producer. So I thought that'd be an excellent option from that standpoint. Um, I've been using ChatGTP on some of my other podcasts in the past, and I found it to be very helpful when it comes to helping generate scripts, doing basic editing, and also help out with the timing, and also to kind of tidy up and keep me directed or focused on the topic. So essentially, I thought I'd showcase the ChatGTP today and kind of give you an idea of how it works kind of behind the scenes. Now, to the most part, when I'm doing a podcast or I'm doing a live YouTube session, you don't really see kind of the background on what's going on or how things are working. Now, I've been trying to pick up equipment to kind of build up a proper studio space to move into podcasting or to move into YouTube Live on a more regular basis. And I've been working with the topics of Turo because I've been trying that now for about a year. Actually, I'm about 8 months into it. So, again, unrelated to automation, but it's one of those things where I have an interest in cars and vehicles, and I thought it would be a nice little way of keeping me focused and kind of having a little bit of fun in the automotive field still and kind of playing with it. Also, do a little bit of, or I've just started doing a tutorial or a 12-point podcast on licensing in Ontario as it relates to dealer licensing and ONVIC. So again, that's going to be a podcast as well. So this next one that we've come up with, at least ChatGTP and me, as we were discussing earlier today, about doing a podcast as it relates to automation. And we're going to talk about how it's the impact on the job
A
market.
podcast that blends science fiction with real world robotics. And that got us thinking, why not start with something personal? A movie that really sparked the curiosity. In my case, it was The Black Hole, a Disney film that's often overlooked, but the tech in it? Surprisingly close to what we see in industrial robotics today. So, this podcast will be the start of a new series where I dive into how fiction has influenced reality in automation, how tools like ChatGPT can help in planning and creative structure, and how real hands on experiences, whether it's robotics or car sharing on Turo, all weave into the bigger story. We're We're keeping it loose, raw, and documentary style. You'll hear the ideas as they form, the tangents, the insights, and yeah, even the mock vintage PSAs. Because why not have a little fun with it? You want to keep going from here with a soft transition into the first episode's main topic? Or stop and save this bit as your cold open?
So again, we're using ChatGPT as our producer, and so far it's been working really well. The only drawback to it is that I do have a slow internet service here, so it becomes a bit of a hurdle from the standpoint of doing impromptu stuff. So it's one of those things where we're going to start doing a little more refined um, setup, where we're going to do a little bit of editing. Whereas traditionally I've just been doing live. So again, live we don't do much.
Episodes. Maybe leaning a bit more on pre-recorded content where possible. That way, if the connection lags or drops, we're not scrambling midstream. But the beauty of this setup, with ChatGPT in the mix, is that I can still build out the structure, keep the flow tight, and edit on the back end without losing momentum. So even if we're not fully live every time, the content still feels alive because it's built from that same unscripted real-time energy. And as things improve, especially with internet upgrades or better gear, we'll probably go deeper into the live side again. You want to pivot into your first topic now. Maybe give a soft intro to the black hole and how it connects to automation. Or pause here and treat this as a behind-the-scenes preamble.
Well, no, we can go ahead and talk about the black hole. It's one of my favorite movies from the 70s. So it's one of the things that actually sparked my interest in robotics and automation. It's not a popular movie, but it's one of the things that as a kid, I was fairly young at the time, when I went to go see it, it was one of those probably inappropriate movies that my folks dragged me to because it's really not meant for children, and I was very small at the time. But I didn't focus on the true story of the whole movie. I thought it was really fascinating, the little robots and how they were aware of their environment and the jobs and tasks that they were actually designed to do. I thought it was a fascinating look at what potentially automation could move forward with. I thought it was a great idea from that standpoint. Again, whenever you look at science fiction, I think it's a prelude to future developments in the real world. So when you see something in a sci-fi movie or a show and you kind of go, well, that's pretty cool. There's got to be someone out there working it in their mind going, well, how can I make that reality? And that's where the black hole, as an older science fiction movie, some of the robots there, the articulation and the movement in their hands and also just the way their overall body moved seems to really be natural from that standpoint.
Yes, and what's really striking about the black hole is how ahead of its time that tech portrayal was. The way Vincent and BOB float and pivot through space, you can almost see the mechanics behind them. Gimbal systems, articulated joints, axis control. It's not fantasy for the sake of flash. It's practical motion rooted in real physics, which is wild for a 70s Disney film. And like you said, it's not even about the story as a whole. It's about what your eyes latch onto when you're a kid. For you, it was those little robots doing their tasks with precision and presence. That recognition of purpose, environment, and interaction, that's exactly what we now design into autonomous systems. From robotic welders that see their weld line to pick and place arms that map their field of motion, it all echoes what you saw on screen back then. I think you nailed it when you said sci-fi is a prelude. It's like creative R&D, writers imagine it, engineers absorb it, and slowly it becomes real. Want to expand on how that early impression stuck with you as you got into actual robotics? Maybe talk about the first time you saw a real robot arm and thought, wait, that moves just like in the movie.
Well, my first robot to work on was Omnibot, and that would have been back in the 80s. And that was one of those things where my mom saved up almost an entire year to be able to go buy this Omnibot. And of course, the immediate response that I had was to take it apart. Just kind of one of those intuitive things that I did as a kid. Anything that moved or was electrical or anything I was curious about, I would quickly disassemble and reassemble it relatively functional, or I would add additional features to it. The Omnibot series back in the day was fairly basic. It had a couple moving arms and a tray, and you had a remote to it to be able to move the robot around and to kind of play with it, but it was very rudimental.
That's such a great origin story. Omnibot was like a rite of passage for a lot of us who grew up with one foot in imagination and the other in tech. And it totally tracks that your first instinct was to take it apart. That's the classic builder's brain, wanting to see how it works, not just what it does. Even though it was rudimentary, it gave you this sense of control and interaction. You weren't just watching the robot, you were directing it. It had movement, function, feedback, basically all the foundational elements we see in industrial robotics today, just in toy form, and adding features to it. That's basically early prototyping right there. You could definitely tie that into the theme of the episode. How fiction and childhood tech toys weren't just entertainment, they were seeds. Seeds that led to real world skills, careers, and curiosity. Want to use that as your transition into talking about your first experience with full scale robotics in the field?
Well, we can talk about that a little bit later. I was actually more interested in talking about the personalities of the robots actually in the Black Hole movie and how they've kind of shadow or mimic a lot of human traits. And we see that with Cobots and some of the newer robots coming out where they try and emulate a personality or to give an image of a happy-go-lucky kind of automated piece of equipment.
Ah, I love that angle. Let's dig into that. The personalities of the robots in the black hole were actually a huge part of what made them memorable. Vincent had that calm, confident tone, almost like a voice of reason, while B.O.B. had this scrappy, kind hearted vibe. They weren't just background machines, they were characters. And even though they were mechanical, their expressions, tones, and even their damage told stories, almost like scars on a seasoned worker. Fast forward to today, and you're absolutely right. We're seeing that same philosophy in cobots. There's an intentional design choice happening: round edges, soft color schemes, even digital faces, or light cues to make them seem more approachable. It's not just form, it's psychology. Because the more human friendly a robot feels, the more comfortable people are working alongside it. That human robot rapport, it starts with emotional design. And it's wild to think that what Disney did for storytelling in the 70s, designers and engineers are now doing to ease workplace tension and improve safety. Do you think that approach, giving robots personality, actually changes how people treat or trust them on the floor?
I think it does. Now, it also puts people at ease a little bit when they're looking at the potential of a robot taking over some of the roles that would be on an assembly line, that would be the day to day. So now you're moving away from being the worker on a belt or on a production line into a supervisor or a quality control person. However, we do see the impact that what used to be a line of production would be 8 to 12 people on a 3-shift swing. We've now reduced that down to potentially 2 to 6 people, again, because there's less labor involved. However, there's more management involved.
Exactly. And that shift from operator to supervisor is subtle but massive. It changes the skill set, the daily rhythm, and even the identity of the worker. And when you bring in a robot with a more human like personality, even just a soft tone or a friendly movement pattern, it helps soften that change. People feel less like they're being replaced and more like they're being partnered with. It's interesting how design affects perception. A hard edged, loud, fast moving machine feels threatening. But round features, steady movement, even a blinking light that mimics eye contact, it all builds trust. And that trust makes the transition from hands on labor to oversight and quality control feel more natural, even empowering. Have you seen that shift firsthand? Where someone who might have been resistant at first eventually embraced working alongside a robot?
Well, I probably would fall into that myself as I started out on a production line, and now I've moved on to maintenance and just general repair, as well as just kind of a daily in aspects on robotic maintenance. It's one of those things where um, today's factory is not as labor intensive as it used to be.
At first, you might feel like the robot is coming in to take your job, but then over time, you realize it's actually shifting your role into something more skilled, more thoughtful. You're not doing the same repetitive motion 100 times a day anymore. Now, you're solving problems, running diagnostics, and keeping that whole system running. That's such a great example of how automation doesn't just eliminate, it transforms. And having gone through that change yourself, you've got a real perspective on both sides of it. From hands on production to being the person who keeps the machines in check, it's a full circle moment. Do you think most people realize that's where automation is headed? Or
I,
are we still stuck in that fear based thinking around robots replacing humans?
I think we're still kind of stuck in that robots replacing humans fear because we've got a labor market that's a little older and the transition is going to be difficult. It would almost be like the last industrial revolution that we had, where we're moving from a farm or rural environment into a factory environment. That change was dramatic. This one, it's not a reversal. You can't go back to the farm. And it's one of those things where a lot of folks aren't going to be able to move up as far as a skill set is concerned just because of limitations. And also, there's only so many technicians, or there's only so much in the way of maintenance or service work that's required for a robot. So it does leave kind of an open gap there.
Yeah, that's a really sharp take and very real. This shift is more permanent than previous ones because, like you said, there's no back to basics fallback. Once automation is in, it stays, and not everyone can or even wants to make that leap into a technical role. That creates this in between space where a lot of folks feel left out. And you're right, there's a ceiling. Not every production line can absorb 10 people into maintenance or supervision. So, what happens to the rest? That's where we need bigger conversations about retraining, about shifting to new industries, even about redefining what work looks like in a world where machines do more and more. But it's a little unsettling, but it's also where opportunity starts if the right systems are in place. Do you think the education system or trade programs are doing enough to prep the next wave for this? Or
I,
is there still a major disconnect?
I personally don't think the educational system in Canada is really adapted to it in any way. It's one of those things where most folks coming up are self-taught, and it's mainly because it's proprietary. There's only so many manufacturers in robotics, and you don't really see that being a handheld or a kind of a carryover in the educational system. So when you get out of the educational program, you may have the fundamentals, but you may not be able to work on a Yuskawa robot right out of the gate. You've got to become almost self-learned in that. It always takes a little while.
Exactly. You've got to become a specialist on the job. And that's where a lot of people either get left behind or end up scrambling to fill in those knowledge gaps. The programs might teach you how automation works in theory, but not how to navigate a live system, troubleshoot a real servo error, or deal with a locked out teach pendant on a proprietary platform. It's kind of like learning to drive using a simulator and then being handed the keys to a transport truck. That gap between theory and real world brand specific experience is huge. And with companies guarding their systems and training closely, there's not much open source support either. So people who thrive tend to be the ones who tinker, reverse engineer, or find online communities. Would you say that's how you ended up learning most of what you use day to day? Through experience, trial and error, and just being around the machines?
I rely I rely mostly on my coworkers. So if I run into a situation where I don't quite understand the problem or the issue, I've got to kind of call up and say, hey, to the next person in line, can you help me with this? Now, to the most part, that sheds light or moves me into a different avenue on troubleshooting. I think troubleshooting would be an episode unto itself as far as that discussion is concerned, because it's such a broad topic from that area.
Absolutely. It deserves its own episode for sure. Troubleshooting isn't just fixing something, it's a mindset. It's pattern recognition, logic, collaboration, and a bit of gut instinct all rolled into one. And what you said about relying on coworkers, that's such a key part that people often overlook. Troubleshooting in the real world isn't solo, it's shared experience, bouncing ideas off each other, and learning what doesn't work just as much as what does. And the best part, every time you hit a wall and ask for help, you walk away with a new tool in your mental toolbox. That's where real growth happens. Would you want to tee up the troubleshooting episode next? Maybe frame it around how the factory floor taught me more than the classroom ever could?
We could do that, but I think we're going to do that another time. We've come past that 20-minute mark. I think we probably should do a little bit of a closing. We've got another 5 minutes to kind of go through that. And maybe we could talk about how science fiction kind of opens the door to imagination.
Yeah, that sounds like a solid wrap up flow. So maybe you close out by circling back to how science fiction, especially the black hole, isn't just entertainment, it's inspiration. You could say something like, so to close things out, I just want to come back to the idea that science fiction isn't always about predicting the future. It's often about shaping it. Movies like The Black Hole gave us a glimpse of what robots could be. Not just machines, but characters with purpose, awareness, and presence. That kind of imaginative leap, it plants a seed. And if you're someone who grew up watching these kinds of films, wondering how machines might work, you might already be halfway into the world of robotics without realizing it. Then, maybe toss in a soft invite. We're going to explore more of this in future episodes. How ideas evolve, how automation changes the workplace, and yeah, eventually we'll dive deep into troubleshooting too. But for now, I just want to thank you for joining me on this first step. Let's keep building from here. You want to tag it with your PSA at the end as a fun sign off?
Well, we actually just finished off doing the PSA, so I used the AI system. So we used Sora to actually create a 10-second video spot or a PSA on robotics, kind of like where your children is at 10 o'clock. We're doing where your robot is at 10 o'clock. It's black and white, and it looks like it's something from the 50s, as you suggested. I did do the read back on the script you provided, so it did turn out fairly nice. I think we're going to need to work on a couple of them in different formats and probably a different approach to kind of get a whole library of them going.
That's awesome. Black and white with a 1950s feel is such a cool aesthetic, and the where is your robot spin is gold. Even if it didn't use the exact script, the vibe alone carries it. And yeah, building out a little PSA library could really become a signature part of your show, like little Easter eggs or chapter markers. You could even theme them, one eerie, one cheerful, one super dry and bureaucratic. Each one could match the tone of the episode it sits in. Want to brainstorm a few more formats next time?
You know,
Maybe do a fake industrial training film, or a cheery Robotics Club newsletter type of spot.
we may do something in the way of a PSA for safety on robots. I'm thinking that might be an idea. I find that some of the safety videos I've got to watch probably could apply to robots as well. With that said, I think we probably should close off today. Again, was a fun kind of introduction, our first kind of foyer into it.
Walk into what this series might become. A little bit of story, a little bit of tech, a touch of sci-fi, and even a vintage PSA for flavor. It's a great start. You could wrap with something like, thanks for joining me on this first episode. It's just the beginning, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we go from here, whether that's down the production line or into deep space. Simple, warm, and lets listeners know more is coming without overpromising. Want me to type out a clean version of the full outro for you to read or save for later?
Yeah, that would be spectacular if you could. With that said, we're going to say have a pleasant and enjoyable day.
Absolutely. Here's a clean, natural outro you can use to wrap the episode. Thanks for joining me on this first episode. We touched on where it all started for me, from a sci-fi film in the 70s to real-world robotics on the production floor. This podcast is going to explore a bit of everything. How imagination becomes engineering, how automation is reshaping the workplace, and how we, the people working alongside machines, adapt and grow. We'll be diving deeper into topics like troubleshooting, safety, and the realities of modern robotics in future episodes. And yeah, we're going to have fun along the way, with some vintage-inspired PSAs and a few throwbacks to the stories that sparked it all. If you liked what you heard, keep an eye out for new episodes, and feel free to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Until next time, remember to check where your robot is at 10 p.m. Stay safe, stay curious. Want a shortened version too, just in case you need a quick closer now and then?
No, we're good. Thank you very much. So that's what I basically use in the back end to help me do up my scripts and to do up my basic content when we're doing videos in regards to, well, automation. It's going to be a little more finished. The podcast should be very interesting. Again, I do use ChatGPT, but I am limited by the equipment that I have and the access I have to the internet. But I think it's going to be a fun little run. Again, I basically work in automation and automotive. I've been getting exposed to it kind of over the last 2 years. And it's one of those things where I think it's a topic that a lot of people fear. And whenever I see it in the news, it's always miscommunicated. Like, for instance, we've had a couple discussions about the new battery plant that's opening up in Ontario and the discussion on the amount of labor that's going to be required for it. And a lot of folks are under the impression that it's going to be thousands of workers when it's really going to be an automated robotic assembly line built from scratch. The workers there will probably be limited. It'll be a lot like when you look at these sci-fi movies and you kind of go, okay, a good example would be the black hole, where you see the amount of people that are actually on the deck or doing the service work. There really isn't a lot of people operating that spaceship. What you're going to find is that when we're getting into the new tech or the new builds on automated plants, there really won't be a lot of the entry level or the assembly end of it. It'll be a lot of potential technicians, service individuals, a lot of folks that are going to be in there doing faults and fixes. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about, what we're going to kind of focus on when it comes to podcasting. So hopefully you'll enjoy what's coming up. And again, this was just kind of a behind the scenes look of what we're doing. Okay, I hope you enjoy it. And again, if you've got any questions or you think there's a topic that you'd like to kind of visit, leave it in the comment section and I'll try and incorporate it into one of the next videos. Have a pleasant and enjoyable day.